Hello and welcome to Miguel Delaney's Inside Football Edition 4. This is a new videocast that will complement my newsletter, also called Inside Football, as well as my general work for The Independent, where we'll discuss the major themes and all the big discussions from the big games, but also explore the headlines. And in this edition, want to discuss a debate within the Premier League that comes from the Ballon d'Or, but it isn't about whether Lamine Yamal should have won over Ousmane Dembele. Rather, it's why so few Premier League players are actually involved in such debates and why so few Premier League players actually occupy a space on the Ballon d'Or podium. That's the top three positions. So over the last 25 years, basically all of this millennium, that there's been 75 places, and the Premier League, despite its burgeoning wealth over that period, has only had 13 places and 3 winners. Now that is remarkable, and it's quite a disconnect from the Premier League's status really as the premium product in sport. I mean, this isn't an issue of, say, the early 2000s when the Premier League couldn't pay the wages of Italy or Spain, because obviously they can. I mean, the league is paying 2.5 billion more in wages than the next league, which is Spain. And yet despite that, it's like the Premier League just doesn't have this strand of talent that really grabs the attention of the world and the voters in the way some of the other leagues do. Now, look, there are other elements to this. It's well known that clubs like Barcelona, Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain, they're very interested in what the Ballon d'Or represents, what it means about kind of keeping stars happy. So the story from sources within football is that there's much more aggressive lobbying about all this sort of stuff. So some of it is a little bit self-perpetuating. But even then, you would think that given its wealth, given some of the players it's had, there'd be more players up there. And yeah, it is quite a strange situation. Again, it's not for want of money. There might be other elements involved. And one is obviously that the Premier League has generally gone for... It's been a league of coaches, say. The stars have generally been the coaches over the past few years. Also, the fact, while we talk about the Premier League in terms of, as a league and an entire competition in itself, and how it stands above La Liga, Serie A, the Bundesliga, in that context, it's a much more kind of unified entity, and at least financially, than other competitions, where really the way people in football talk now is you've got the Premier League, and then you've got like satellite super clubs like Barcelona, Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich. The Italian clubs a little less these days, but obviously Milan, Inter and Juventus tried to set up the Super League, and these clubs are at the core of this. All of those clubs in terms of their financial power. And yes, so even if leagues like Spain and Italy and Germany don't have that financial strength anymore because they can't compete with the Premier League's broadcasting revenue, they do have clubs that can get to that level. And I think it's an interesting one because it has served as a little bit of an equaliser in European football. Yes, the Premier League can spend so much money, but still the biggest super clubs in Europe can attract that top tier talent. I mean, people in football talk about how there is still a cultural and lifestyle element that, as someone put to me, it's more attractive to live in Barcelona or Madrid than Manchester. That is still a factor despite the grandeur of so many English clubs. And again, yes, so much comes down to wages. But what's interesting, I think, isn't so much why it's happening, because obviously the Premier League has also developed a lot of its stars. I mean, look, Cristiano Ronaldo is one of them. He won his Ballon d'Or, his first Ballon d'Or at Manchester United. Mohamed Salah, you would feel, is at that level. So is Son Heung-min, actually. So like these sort of players that can, grab attention in that way. And you'd wonder, I suppose, maybe if some Premier League clubs were as political about this as some of their European counterparts, whether a player like Salah would actually have been closer to a Ballon d'Or. Now, on that, actually, in terms of this year, when I did a video the other day, one of the main responses I got was, well, why are you not advocating for Salah in the way you've been arguing that Yamal should have won the Ballon d'Or? I think there's a simple response to that, which is basically that English clubs, Liverpool did not go that far in the Champions League. And I do think that matters in the Ballon d'Or, that it's about performance across multiple fronts, and domestic performance isn't really enough. And that, of course, actually goes hand in hand with, I think, another reason why the Premier League hasn't had as many Ballon d'Or stars, which is basically, despite its immense wealth, despite having like almost double, treble the wealth of some of the other major leagues, it doesn't do twice or 3 times as well in terms of European performance. And I think that could also influence some of the voting and why we don't see Premier League stars so high. And Part of that is because of how competitively intense the Premier League is, that it kind of, it demands more from its clubs than some of the European rivals. The big question isn't why it's happened, it's what happens next. And on that, one of the things I've heard over the last few days is that some executives are starting to float the idea of a luxury tax, which is basically that there would be potentially PSR exceptions in order to allow the Premier League to bring in the biggest stars who command the biggest wages. And I have to say, I do find that solution quite remarkable because, again, as we said at the top, the issue here isn't that the Premier League doesn't pay enough. It pays out 2.5 billion more in wages than anyone else. So the question is really how that money is spent, where it's going, whether clubs can be more strategic with their money. But then, of course, the way they spend all influences everyone else. I mean, really, they're involved in a kind of almost a salary arms race. And it means that you're one of the most powerful weapons in the arms race is, of course, your wage bill, what sort of budget you can pay. And so few then are willing to kind of tilt that by paying so much more to one player and then leaving the squad potentially imbalanced. Although it's interesting, that is a dynamic that could well decide the Premier League title race this year, because it has felt like Arsenal have gone for strength and depth and signed a series of very good and one or two top players like Zubimendi and Eze, but really they've gone for depth of squad, whereas Liverpool have gone all out for game changers and someone like Alexander Isak, who a lot of people talk about as a potential future Ballon d'Or winner. Same with Florian Wirtz. But yeah, the next potential solution, if he ever gets this far, is a luxury tax. Now, as ever with the Premier League, the issue in these situations is that everyone only votes in their own interest. It's a competition that is entirely decided by the votes of its members, or the 20 clubs, and every decision needs a majority of 14 to get through. Now, because of recent politics in the Premier League, that has led to an element of political stasis where they've been really struggling to force stuff through, like the next stage of PSO, or the squad cost ratio. So I realise these are quite dry and boring regulatory terms to discuss, but they are important as to what actually happens on the pitch. And because so many clubs at this point are always thinking about their own interests rather than the wider Premier League or even the wider game, it has led to a lot of disagreement in the Premier League right now, and it might well see a struggle to push through anything like a luxury tax. But yes, it is very interesting that there is this disconnect between what the Premier League is around the world, which is this globally admired, the biggest league in sport, as bombastically proclaims itself, and the fact it doesn't have what really usually proves the engine in sport, which is stars. I mean, that also, what's all the more striking about that is that so many contracts and commercial deals in football, including in England, are anchored around stars and the star system. So I think while many people might see the modern Ballon d'Or as a bit of a nonsense, it could start to spark some sort of change in the Premier League. So thank you. Please like and subscribe and comment. Thank you.